The timestamp was 11:51 p.m. outside. A blizzard was burying Denver in white silence. But inside my apartment, the only thing I felt was the cold blue light of my phone. The text message from my mother, Susan, sat on the screen like a verdict. She wrote, "Your father and I agree. Until you fund Chloe's engagement party, don't bother coming to the Aspen Gala. You're ruining this family." I didn't even have a second to absorb the cruelty before another notification lit up the screen. Instagram. People imagine betrayal as something explosive. They picture shouting, glass breaking, doors slamming so hard the hinges crack. In my family, betrayal never sounded like that. It was subtle, polished. It was the faint whisper of heavy paper sliding across polished marble. It was 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Outside, the Chicago wind tore in from the lake, sharp and relentless. Inside my parents' North Shore mansion, the air was warm and perfectly still, perfumed with pine garlands and something floral and expensive. I had just stepped into the foyer, snow still clinging to my boots, coat buttoned to my chin. When Susan approached, she didn't hug me. She didn't ask how the drive had been. She handed me a single sheet of thick, cream-colored cardstock. "We found something for you," she said lightly, as if offering dessert. "Since you're still floating, the Vanderbilts are looking for a live-in nanny. Full-time. We scheduled an interview for tomorrow morning." I lowered my eyes to the page. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an itinerary interview. 8 a.m. position. Nanny. Duties. Childcare. Light housekeeping. Meal preparation. It aligns with your skill set, Susan added, her lips stretching into that narrow, brittle smile she wore when she was being deliberately cruel. "And it includes room and board, so you won't have to worry about rent." I didn't blink. I didn't react. I felt the familiar frost spreading through my chest. They weren't looking at a daughter. They were assessing a liability. In their eyes, I was a drifting, impractical failure whose highest qualification was wiping the noses of their wealthy neighbors' children. They believed I was broke, directionless, damaged. What they didn't know was that while they were arranging my future as domestic help, I was in the final stages of acquiring a company valued at $4.80 billion. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's here with us. A moment later, my father, Brian, entered the foyer. He carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms and believed gravity might submit to him if he scowled hard enough.
He didn't acknowledge the paper in my hand. He examined my boots.
Instead scuffed from snow. Then my coat 3 winters old. To him. These weren't preferences. They were proof of insolvency. He slipped a hand into his blazer and withdrew a red envelope. He didn't place it in my palm. He held it out just beyond reach, forcing me to take it, an old choreography he had mastered when I was still small enough to look up at him in awe. "Your mother's concerned," he said quietly, as if discussing a medical diagnosis. "She thinks you're not eating properly, and with the holidays, we can't have you appearing desperate. It reflects poorly on the family." I accepted the envelope. It was thick. I already knew what it contained. Still, I opened it. Crisp $100 bills, fresh, untouched, roughly $8,500 at a glance. "Think of it as a bridge loan," Brian said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Until you secure the Vanderbilt position. Buy something presentable, clean yourself up. And don't mention this to Zachary. He already thinks we're too indulgent." I looked at the cash. Then at the marble floors. At the chandeliers scattering crystal light across vaulted ceilings. Brian believed he was being generous. The benevolent patriarch extending mercy to his struggling daughter. He had no idea he was standing in my house. 5 years earlier, his guaranteed investments had collapsed overnight. He had been weeks from foreclosure. Terrified not of poverty but of gossip at the country club, he never told me. He confided in his lawyer, but I knew. By then, I had already built the core algorithms for Neuron-like. I had liquidity. I didn't write him a check. His pride would never have survived the humiliation. Instead, I purchased the debt, quietly, through a shell corporation, North Shore Holdings. I acquired the mortgage from the bank. For 60 months, One had been the unseen hand paying the principal, the interest, the property taxes. Every month, a wire transferred from my primary account into the holding company. Brian wasn't the owner of this estate, he was a tenant, and I was the landlord, who had never collected rent. I glanced again at the $8,500. The irony tasted metallic. He wasn't offering charity, he was unknowingly refunding a fraction of the hundreds of thousands I had funneled into preserving his image. "Thank you," I said evenly, sliding the envelope into my coat pocket. "I'll make sure it goes exactly where it belongs." He nodded, satisfied. Transaction complete. "Authority restored. Dinner in 10 minutes, he said. "Try not to say anything embarrassing." He walked toward the dining room, footsteps echoing across floors I financed, beneath a roof I owned, fully at ease in a reality that did not exist. I touched the envelope in my pocket. It wasn't a handout. It was a dividend. Dinner unfolded in the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a mahogany table large enough for 20, though only 5 seats were filled. My Aunt Patricia joined us, smelling faintly of gin and lacquered hairspray. She sat beside Susan. Together they flanked Brian. Like ornamental gargoyles, I was placed at the far end, across from my brother, Zachary. 30-2, corporate attorney at one of the city's most prestigious firms. He wore his success like armor. Before lifting his fork, he checked his Rolex Submariner new, conspicuous. "So," he began, voice carrying easily. "Heard about the nanny gig. Good for you, Anna. Honest work builds character." "It's a wonderful opportunity," Susan chimed in, passing the potatoes. "The Vanderbilts are delightful people." I sliced into my steak. "I'm not taking the job." Silverware froze mid-air. Zachary barked out a laugh. "Of course you're not. Some of us are actually grinding." He leaned back, swirling his wine. "Speaking of grinding, you won't believe what landed on my desk. My firm is about to secure the whale of the century." "Oh?" Brian leaned forward. "Go on." "Neuralink AI," Zachary said slowly, savoring each syllable. "Tech unicorn. Valuation just hit $4.8 billion. They're seeking new counsel for their IPO, and guess who's leading the pitch?" He pointed at himself. "If I land this, partnership is guaranteed. Millions in retainers. Alone. Array into a global leader in brain-computer interfaces." The same company Zachary was bragging about courting. "The founder's a ghost," he continued conspiratorially. "Total mystery. Probably some socially awkward guy hiding in a bunker. But I'll crack him. I always do. I studied him. Really studied him. The hunger for validation. The fragile scaffolding of ego that required my failure to remain upright. And suddenly, it clicked. It wasn't enough that they believed I was a disappointment. They needed me to be one. If I was the nanny, Zachary was the titan. My supposed mediocrity, my imagined poverty magnified his wealth. I was the control variable in their experiment of superiority. Without me beneath them, they had no elevation. I wasn't just a failure in their narrative. I was structural support. What makes you think you can land them? Because I understand these tech guys. They want confidence, power, someone who owns the room. Not exactly your arena, Anna. No offense. "None taken," I replied. "It's a different level," Brian added sagely. "High stakes. Big money. Not for the faint-hearted. Zachary's built for that. You'll need patience for the Vanderbilt children." Patricia laughed. "Maybe once he makes partner, he can hire you. Does his firm need someone to water the plants?" The table laughed with her. It wasn't easy. Familiar sound, the sound of hierarchy being reaffirmed. I looked down at my plate. In my inbox sat an email from Zachary's managing partner requesting a meeting with Neuralink's executive team. Please, Zachary scoffed. "Everyone has a price. Everyone wants to be aligned with the winner. And to finally getting Anna off the payroll." Crystal clinked. A bright, ringing note of celebration. I didn't raise my glass. I simply watched them, the realization settling over me like frost. They weren't dining with a failure. They were dining with the executioner. And the meal was nearly finished. Dessert. Arrived a lemon tart, sharp and acidic. Fitting. Susan leaned toward me, anxiety tightening her features. You need to confirm the interview time, Anna. Mrs. Vanderbilt expects you at 8 sharp. Don't be late. First impressions matter. I'm not going, I repeated, my patience thinning. Of course you are, Brian said firmly. Don't be stubborn. It's a foot in the door. Just then, the 85 in television mounted above the fireplace flicked. The muted football game was interrupted by a red breaking news banner. The volume wasn't on, but the headline was impossible to miss. Bloomberg technology mystery solved. Zachary, who had been checking his phone under the table, glanced up. Brian grabbed the remote and unmuted the TV. The sound of a Bloomberg anchor filled the room, urgent and crisp, ending months of speculation in Silicon Valley. The founder of Neuralink AI, the secretive tech unicorn that just secured a $4.88 billion valuation, has finally been identified. The company, which made headlines last week for successful wristing mobility in over 50,000 paralyzed patients, has been led by a single reclusive CEO since its inception. The room went quiet. Zachary leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen. Here it comes, he whispered. The ghost. Sources have confirmed that founder is 29-year-old. Anna Vance. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Then the photo appeared on the screen. It wasn't a grainy paparazzi shot. It was my official press photo taken 3 weeks ago for the Time Person of the Year shortlist. In the photo, I was wearing a tailored black suit, standing on the stage of the Global Tech Summit, looking directly into the camera with a gaze that could cut glass. The valuation flashed below my face. Knee worth $3.2 billion. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking air out of the space. Brian dropped his fork. It hit the china plate with a loud clink that sounded like a bell tolling. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Aunt Patricia stopped Mitchu. But it was Zachary's reaction that was the most satisfying. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shady-off gray. His jaw went slack. He looked from the TV to me, then back to the TV, his brain struggling to reconcile Fetwo realities. The nanny sitting across from him and the titan on the screen. Vance, a prodigy in neural engineering, built the company's core architecture. Hearst, the reporter continued. Industry insiders describe her as brilliant, ruthless, and entirely focused on the mission. I didn't look at the TV, it looked at them. I watched their realization hit them like a physical wave. The $8,500 in my pocket felt like an insult to a god. I picked up me water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The Vanderbilts can find another nanny, I said calmly. I'm busy running a multi-billion-dollar company, the false reality they had constructed. The one where I was the failure and they were the saviors, shattered into a million pieces. It was frantic, desperate scrambling of rats on a sinking ship. Zachary's phone buzzed. Once, twice, then it exploded into relentless vibration against the mahogany table. He glanced down. It's the managing partner, he stammered, his voice thin. My phone buzzed at the exact same moment. I didn't need to look to know who it was. It was my chief. Off-staff confirming that the press embargo had lifted. But I picked it up anyway, unlocking the screen with a calm swipe. You should probably answer that, Zachary, I said. He sounds urgent. Zachary stared at his phone like it was a live grenade. He didn't answer. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and terrified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man realizing his entire career was built on a lie that had just been exposed. Yauknu, he whispered. I also know that you told your partners you had an in with the founder. You told them you were working a connection. Is that right? He flinched. You assumed I was a nobody I cut in. Yao assumed I was so desperate for validation that I'd be your stepping stone. You sold me as your asset without ever asking me. You lied to your partner, Zachary. You defrauded your own firm. Brian finally found his voice. No, hold on, Anna. Let's not use words like fraud. Zachary was just showing initiative. He's ambitious. Surely you can understand that initiative. It lawed a cold, sharp sound. Hemmed me to my face while unknowing libegging for my business behind my back. I looked directly at Zachary. Do you want to know why your firm hasn't received a response to your pitch? He nodded mutely. Because I flagged it, I said. I saw your name on the lead counsel list. I personally marked it. Do not engage. I told my legal team that your firm lacks the integrity required for a partnership with Neuralink. Zachary looked like he might vomit. Anna, please. You can't do that. I'm up for a partner. If I lose this, you already lost it. I said, you lost it the moment you decided I was beneath you. You lost it every time you interrupted me at dinner. You lost it when you called me a failure 10 minutes ago. I leaned forward. You don't represent me, Zachary. You don't represent my company, and after tonight, you never will. I'm blacklisting your firm from any future contracts. Not just with Neuralink, but with every subsidiary and partner in Mindwork. Anna Susan shrieked. He's your brother. You're ruining his life. I'm not ruining anything, I said calmly. I'm just correcting. He sold a product he didn't own me, and now Thebble is due. Zachary's phone stopped buzzing. A voicemail notification popped up. He stared at it knowing exactly what it contained. The hierarchy had collapsed. He was a man who had built his entire identity on being the provider, the patriarch, the one who held the purse strings. Watching his son crumble had shaken him, but now his survival instinct kicked in. He tried to write history in real time. This is certainly unexpected, but it's marvelous, isn't it? A billionaire. In the family. I reminded him. You said I was nowhere. Tough love, he exclaimed, spreading his hands. We were pushing you, motivating you. And look, it worked. I taught you everything you know about business. The discipline, the efficacy that came from me. I built this foundation so you could soar. I stared at him. The audacity was almost impressive. You built this foundation, I asked softly. Of course, Brian said, puffing out his chest. I've provided everything for this family. I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to shout. The silence in the room was so profound that a whisper would have sounded like a scream. I opened my banking app, navigated to the North Shore, holding the account, and hit the airplane button. The Bloomberg newsfeed on the 85-inch vanished. In its place appeared a spreadsheet, North Shore Holdings LLC, monthly outgoing wires. 1420 Lakeshore Drive. Brian and Susan Van Sether Rose went down the screen. 60 of THME5. Years of payments every month. $12,450. The room froze. It was the kind of silence you hear in a courtroom right after a guilty verdict. What is this? This, I said, pointing to the TV, is the ledger for the shell company that owns your mortgage. Brian turned purple. That's private financial information. Turn that off. You said you built this foundation. But the truth is, 5 years ago, you were insolvent. You were weeks away from losing this house. The bank was going to foreclose. You didn't tell me, but I knew. I looked at him. I bought the debt. Dad, I set up North Shore Holdings to acquire your mortgage, so you wouldn't have to face the humiliation of bankruptcy. For 5 years, I have paid every single dime. The property taxes, the insurance, all of it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope with the $8,500. I tossed it onto the table. You tried to give me charity with money I gave you, I said. You acted like the big man, the provider, handing scraps to his failure off a daughter. For 5 years, I have been keeping a roof over your head. Wasn't a king, he was a tenant living on his daughter's grace. I didn't want to embarrass you, I said. I wanted you to have your dignity, but you used that dignity to belittle me. I didn't know, Brian stammered. You didn't want to know, I corrected. It was easier to believe I was nothing than to admit you needed me. Susan was sobbing no, her hands. You owe him $680,000. I said casually, but don't worry, I'm not asking for it back. Consider it the ghost of my freedom. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, thinly sound in the dead silence. The ledger on the screen glowed, a digital monument to their hypocrisy. The execution was complete. I walked to the foyer, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble, a sound of finality. The family remained frozen in the drawing room, trapped in the amber of their own humiliation. But before I reached the heavy oak door, I heard the scrape of a care. Anna, wait. It was Susan. She stumbled into the hallway, her face ravaged by tears. Her hands trembling as reached out but stopped short of douching me. Please, she choked out. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just wanted you to be safe. We were scared for you. Can't you see that? We're so proud of you. Now we can be a real family. We can start over. Brian appeared behind her, looking aged and broken. Your mother is right, he said, his voice devoid of its usual bluster. We're proud. $4 billion. Anna, you've won. You've proven us wrong. Let you celebrate you. I turned to face them one last time. I looked at the tears, the bleeding eyes, the sudden desperation to claim me. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The need for vengeance was gone. In its place was a vast quiet clarity. That's the problem. I said softly. You're proud of the billions. You're proud of the valuation. You're proud of the having. Of course, Brian insisted. It's success. It's security. No, I corrected. It's status. And that's all you've ever cared about. You see the money and y'all think I've won, but you don't see me. It took a step closer, my voice steady and low. I didn't build Neuralink to Gatterick. I built it because I wanted to solve a problem that mattered. I wanted to help people walk again. I wanted to change the world, not just my net worth. That's the difference between us. You measure life by what you have. I measure it by who I am. We can learn, Susan pleaded. Teach us. I can't, I said, because you only started listening when you saw the price tag. Your respect has a mission fee, and I'm not willing to pay it anymore. I looked over my father's shoulder at Zachary, who was lurking in the doorway, a ghost of his former arrogance. Your table is too small for me, I said. Your mansion is too small. Your definition of success is too small. I haven't just outturned you, I've outgrown you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $8,500. I placed the stack of bills on the hallway table right next to the crystal vase. Keep the money, I said. You're going to need it for the movers. I opened the front door. The cold chicaguare hit my face, sharp and cleansing. A black SUV was waiting at the curb engine, idling my security detail. Readido take me to the private airfield. I stepped out into the night without looking back. As the car pulled away, I picked up my tablet. There was a notification pending approval. A $10 million grant to a pediatric spinal research center in Boston. I tapped approve. The silence in the car was profound. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or overlooked. It was the silence of deep space, vast and limitless. I wasn't the daughter one needed fixing. I wasn't the sister one needed a job. I was Anna Vance, and for the first time in my life, the quiet was in a cage. It was a kingdom. Have you ever had to outgrow the people who raised you? Share your story. In the comments. And if you believe in building in silence, hit that follow button.